Hello, and welcome to A Little Bit of Shakespeare with me, Veronica Reynolds, Head of Community Relations at the New City Library. We're going to be discussing Macbeth today. I chose Macbeth because if you go to Canopy, our online digital streaming service, with the link listed below in the description, you too can watch Macbeth, a Patrick Stewart starring production that came out in 2010 and won a Peabody Award. I thought with this video I could give you some background on the history around when Shakespeare was writing this play, as well as a good solid summary of the show itself so that you can watch and concentrate on what's unfolding rather than trying to understand what's happening. In 1603, King James VII of Scotland becomes King of England. He becomes King James I. You may know the name from the King James Bible, which was the first authorized translation of the Bible into English. One thing we all know about James was that he hated witches. He wrote the book on hating witches. Quite literally, he wrote a book called the Demonologue, which was about identifying witches. He led one of the greatest witch hunts of all time. So when King James becomes King of England, he also becomes William Shakespeare's patron. And now Shakespeare, who's been writing things for Elizabeth, now must write things for James. Macbeth was probably one of his early attempts at this. So it's no surprise that witches and Scottish kings figure fairly heavily into this play. Macbeth is often said to be a cursed play. Through its history, its performances were littered with injured actors, fires, and once even a riot. The Astor Place riot occurred on May 10, 1849, at the now demolished Astor Opera House in Manhattan. The riot resulted in the largest number of civilian casualties due to military action in the United States since the American Revolutionary War. Its origin was a dispute between Edwin Forrest, one of the best-known American actors at the time, and William Charles Macready, a similarly notable English actor, and it largely revolved around which one was better at playing large roles in Shakespeare. Both were scheduled to play Macbeth on the same night. Supporters of both factions took to the streets by the thousands, and the riot was only curtailed by the local militia. As a result, most theater folks will only refer to Macbeth as the Scottish play to avoid the supposed curse. But cursed or not, Macbeth is certainly about the whims of witches, the corruption of power, and getting around prophecy with loopholes. Let's dive in. Macbeth opens in a thunderstorm with three witches on a battlefield. They discuss their meeting with the titular character Macbeth. Then the scene shifts to King Duncan of Scotland. He's told that his generals Macbeth, who is now a Thane of Cawdor, a Thane being a title for landed gentry in Scotland at the time, and Banquo have won the battle. Now Banquo is James I's ancestor, so you know that he's going to be a good guy. Macbeth and Banquo are headed back towards home from battle when they encounter the witches. The witches greet them with prophecy. They give Macbeth three greetings: Thane of Glamis, which is his current title, Thane of Cawdor, and that he will be king thereafter. Banquo asks of his own fortune, and the witches respond a little more paradoxically, saying that he will be less than Macbeth, yet happier and more successful. He will father a line of kings, though he himself will not be one. While the two men wonder over these pronouncements, the witches vanish, and another Thane, Ross, arrives and informs Macbeth of his newly bestowed title, Thane of Cawdor. The first prophecy is thus fulfilled, and Macbeth, previously skeptical, immediately begins to harbor ambitions of being king. King Duncan welcomes and praises Macbeth and Banquo, and declares that he will spend the night at Macbeth's castle at Inverness. In the same scene, he names his son Malcolm as heir, surprising no one really. Macbeth sends a message ahead to his wife, Lady Macbeth, telling her about the witch's prophecies. Lady Macbeth suffers none of her husband's uncertainty and wishes him to murder Duncan in order to obtain kingship. When Macbeth arrives at Inverness, she overrides all of his objections by challenging his manhood and successfully persuades him to kill the king that very night. He and Lady Macbeth plan to get Duncan's two chamberlains so drunk they will black out. The next morning they will blame the murder on the chamberlains. They will be defenseless because they won't remember anything. While Duncan is asleep, Macbeth stabs him, despite his doubts and a number of supernatural importance, including the hallucination of a bloody dagger. Prophecy, hallucinations are themes of the story. Evildoers get instant karma in Macbeth. Macbeth is so shaken by his actions that Lady Macbeth must take charge. She quickly frames Duncan's sleeping servants for the murder by placing the bloody daggers on them. Early the next morning, Macduff, the loyal Thane of Fife, arrives. A porter opens the gate, and Macbeth leads them to the king's chamber, where Macduff discovers Duncan's body. Macbeth murders the guards to prevent them from professing their innocence, but claims that he did so in a fit of anger over their misdeeds. Duncan's sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, flee to England and Ireland respectively, fearing that whoever killed their father will be after them next. The rightful heir's flight makes them suspects, and Macbeth, as a close kinsman to Duncan, becomes king. Banquo is pretty skeptical of this and remembers his own prophecy, and which increases his suspicions. Despite his success, Macbeth is also aware of the part of the prophecy that says Banquo will father the next line of kings. So Macbeth invites Banquo to a royal banquet, where he discovers that Banquo and his young son Fleance will be riding out into the night. Macbeth arranges for them to be murdered by hiring 2 men to kill them and later having to send a third when the first 2 fail. The assassins succeed in killing Banquo, but Fleance, a child, escapes. Macbeth becomes furious. He fears that his power remains insecure as long as an heir of Banquo remains alive. At another banquet, Macbeth invites his lords and Lady Macbeth to a night of drinking and merriment. Banquo's ghost enters and sits at Macbeth's place. Macbeth raves fearfully, startling his guests as the ghost is only visible to him, a manifestation of his own guilt. The others panic at the sight of Macbeth raging at the empty chair until desperate Lady Macbeth tells them her husband is just sick. The ghost departs and Macbeth calms down. And then he comes back, and this time Macbeth is uncontrollable, and Lady Macbeth must end the party, sending away the lords. Macbeth, in a great state of disturbance, visits the 3 witches once more, this time asking them for some sort of sign that their prophecy will remain true. Each of them provide a symbol to confirm their assurance that he is king. First, they conjure an armored head, which tells him to beware of Macduff. Second, a bloody child tells him that no one born of a woman can harm him. Thirdly, a crowned child holding a tree states that Macbeth will be safe until the great Birnam Woods comes to Duncan Hill. Macbeth is relieved and feels secure because he knows that all men are born of women and forests cannot move. Macbeth also asks whether Banquo's son will ever reign in Scotland. The witches show him a procession of kings, all similar in appearance to Banquo. Macbeth realizes these are all Banquo's descendants, having acquired kingship in numerous countries. As soon as the witches perform a dance and leave, Macduff's friend enters and tells Macbeth that Macduff has fled to England. Macbeth orders Macduff's castle to be seized and most cruelly sends murderers to slaughter Macduff as well as his wife and children. But of course, Macduff is no longer at the castle, so they just kill Lady Macduff and their young son. Meanwhile, Lady Macbeth has become racked with guilt from the crimes that she and her husband have committed. A doctor and a gentlewoman discuss Lady Macbeth's strange habit of sleepwalking. She enters in a trance with a candle in her hand, bemoaning the murders of Duncan, Lady Macduff, and Banquo as she tries to wash imaginary blood off of her hands, all the while speaking of those terrible things. Her belief that nothing can wash away the blood on her hands is ironic, considering earlier she had said to Macbeth that a little water had cleared them of the murder of Duncan as they wiped the blood off of their hands. Back in England, Macduff is informed of the death of his wife and children. Prince Malcolm, Duncan's son, has succeeded in raising an army in England with the support of the Scottish lords back home, who are finding Macbeth's ravings and seeing of ghosts to be slightly disturbing, as one might imagine in a king. So Malcolm leads an army along with Macduff to Duncan Castle. While encamped in the Birnam Woods, the soldiers are ordered to cut limbs off of the trees and use them to disguise their numbers. As they advance, these limbs are carried in front of them, so it appears as though the woods are moving, thus fulfilling part of the witch's prophecies. Before Macbeth's opponents can arrive, he's informed of his wife's suicide. This brings on a pessimistic despair, and he delivers one of the most famous soliloquies of the play, containing that famous line, "Tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow." Though he reflects on the brevity and the meaningless of life, he does still prepare for battle. Macbeth is still pretty certain that the witch's prophecies guarantee his invincibility until he hears about the English stick trick. Quite quickly, the English army overwhelms the Scottish army and overtakes the castle. The battle culminates in a sword fight between Macbeth and Macduff. But Macbeth is still prideful and boasts that he cannot be killed by any man who was born of woman. Which is when Macduff comes back with that he was ripped all untimely from his mother's womb, and therefore is not from any woman born. What he's saying is he's a C-section baby, and therefore he wasn't traditionally birthed, which is a loophole in the prophecy. Now, some of us may know or are people who've had C-sections and may have a little argument with that, but it is a pretty neat loophole. And sure enough, Macduff quickly beheads Macbeth and parades the head to Malcolm, who will be crowned king. Now, don't forget that Banquo was promised that line of kings, and sure enough, eventually, Banquo's heirs will take the throne, which will one day lead to King James I, Shakespeare's patron. Now, I won't keep you long. This video's already gone on long enough. I just want to remind you that you should watch Macbeth on Canopy, KANOPY.com, with your new City Library barcode. It's a version with Patrick Stewart playing the titular character that came out in 2010 and received the Peabody Award for performance. I also want you to keep in mind as you watch, think about how witches were influential at this time, how the idea of a magical force beyond our power might influence our future. And last, but not least, we want you to know that while our building is closed, the new City Library staff is still working for you. If you have any ideas of videos, book clubs, any online resources that we can offer you, please let us know in the comments below, and we'll try and do our best. We hope you're staying safe, and we'll see you all soon.